and we are an independent public policy think tank working across Africa and internationally. I'd like to quickly introduce you to our consortium partners. SAIIA is just the host. The research was mainly done by the consortium partners, mainly the University College of London, as well as the Centre for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University, and then the Basque Centre for Climate Change. That is, so it's my great pleasure to just host you today and steer the discussion. And then also we are very grateful to acknowledge the project partner and for their support. That is the French Development Agency, AFD. And well, yeah, so we're glad to just here to mark the launch of this, the research that really provides a new science-based diagnosis of South Africa's environmental health. And I think it's a long time in terms of how we look at the policy conversations being dominated by, economic metrics, but not often failing to capture the true state of the natural capital, like the water, the air, and the land upon which our economy and society ultimately depends on. So we today hope to really just introduce the work that's been done by the research partners, and we hope to take it beyond just another report, but making it a very important tool for discussing is precisely how far we've gone in South Africa in improving and developing and advancing environmental sustainability, and checking in whether we're moving in the right direction. So with we're looking to have all the panelists discuss the insights and also the work to be presented. Let me quickly just do some housekeeping. Please note that you're welcome to add your comments and questions and in the chat function, as well as you're welcome. We'll also have towards the end a dedicated Q&A session where you might be able to ask your question. So let me just also quickly introduce the panelists here today. Firstly, our first speaker will also be Miss Marie-Hélène Lauzon from the Agency Française de Development, AFD, the project partner. Then Professor Paul Ekins from the University College London, who is the co-creator of the ESGAP framework. Then also Dr. Arquez Uzebiago Liano from the Basque Centre for Climate Change, who is also the lead author of the report. And we have Professor Mark Swilling from the Centre for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University, as well as Dr. Mapula Sangela from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment joining us, as well as Mr. Mahloli Tau from the South African National Biodiversity Institute. And later on, you'll hear from Dr. Haley Clements, who is also with Stellenbosch University CST. So without further ado, can I just hand over to Miss Marie-Hélène Lauzon for a brief introduction on the purpose of the research. So Marie-Hélène, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dion, and good morning to everyone. So on the purpose, yes, of this research and intended impact, so Agence Française de Développement has been present and active in South Africa since '94. We have provided a lot of technical cooperation and also a wide range of financing solutions in support of South Africa development. Our mandate now is very much to support the just energy transition, while also contributing to the reduction of poverty and multidimensional inequality. So, of course, with this mandate, collaboration with South African partners is very closely aligned with the ecological transition and the principles of strong sustainability. Environmental degradation is really one of the most pressing challenges of our time. We know it has multiple impacts, not only environmental impacts per se, of course, but also economic impacts, because we are very much aware now of the ecosystemic services rendered by environment, and also, of course, social impacts, because we also know that vulnerable populations suffer disproportionately more from this environmental degradation. So to address this challenge effectively, we're convinced that policymakers need clear science-based metrics to go beyond the traditional economic indicators to assess the absolute health of the nation's natural capital. So this is why adopting the strong sustainability approach, it is so important. This will allow us to answer critical questions. And the first one, of course, is how far is South Africa from a sustainable environmental state? So we believe that the ESGAP framework is a highly relevant tool in that regard, using data to inform national sustainability policies in line with science-based environmental standards. The key question, of course, then for policymakers will be to identify pathways to close this gap. And this is exactly why policy dialogue then becomes essential and interesting, because, of course, defining these pathways will involve trade-offs and challenges that can only be resolved through this policy dialogue. More specifically, then, the findings of this study will support our growing commitment on adaptation and resilience alongside the climate and health nexus. This is really an ongoing commitment that reflects also the priorities of our South African partners, as we can see in the new NDC, which emphasizes very much adaptation, and also the upcoming climate change response plan that is being prepared by the DFFE. Maybe one last example of this strong alignment between AFD and our partners. We have signed recently a new collaboration with SAIIA that is focusing on the nexus between climate and biodiversity. And I believe this is also a way to feed South Africa's contribution to the G20. So back to you, Dion.
Thank you so much, Marie-Hélène, for the context and also for the AFD's crucial support in making this research possible. I think it's really important work that you're doing, and also the work that SAIIA will be doing in advancing some of the findings here, but also the key focus that we'll have on our research project. But then now let's dive into the heart of the matter, and I'm going to hand over to the lead researchers. First, it's going to be Prof. Paul Eakin, that's going to introduce the conceptual foundations of the ESGAP framework. And then following him, we're going to have Dr. Arcades Usibiago-Lihano, who will be providing the overview of the key findings from the report to look at the South African landscape. So, Paul, the floor is yours. Thank you so much. I'm stopping my slide share, and you're welcome to share your slide.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Dion. And just before I start sharing the slides, I just want to give my own thanks. I want to give my thanks to you for hosting this event, to other colleagues in South Africa who've worked on this report and made it possible, but also particularly to AFD. This whole framework has been many years in the creation, so I did most of the theoretical work back in the early 2000s. And then Arcades came and did a PhD at UCL, and he implemented it for the EU plus the UK. And I'm going to show you some of the slides from that work. And AFD then came in and has supported the calculation of the ESGAP and the implementation of it for a number of different countries, so including Kenya and Vietnam and Colombia and now South Africa. So you can see there's quite a diversity of evidence that has been built up across the world. We've also had people working on it in China, and there's been a paper published on it in Japan. So this is now quite a well-established methodology. And as Marie-Hélène said, I'm an economist, and therefore I'm very familiar with the normal economic ways of giving money values to environmental effects, but have come to the conclusion that really the strong sustainability approach, which really prioritizes the natural science aspects of it in line with the kind of thinking behind the planetary boundaries, is something that needs to be developed very much alongside that. And I'm going to give the rationale for that approach now. So I will now share my screen. So this is a quick introduction to why I think we need strong sustainability measures and the ESGAP framework. So there are these two quite different worldviews. There's the weak sustainability approach and the strong sustainability approach. The weak sustainability approach seeks really to put environmental impacts in money terms so that they can be compared with other monetary aggregates. And of course, once you put everything in the same numeraire, you are implying quite explicitly that there is trade-off possibilities, that these that these different forms of capital, which is how often this is expressed, that it's more or less indifferent between human capital, between physical produced capital and natural capital, and it is the aggregate that is important. And I've got this quotation there from Professor Partha Dasgupta's forward to the Inclusive Wealth Report in 2018, which makes
Paul,
explicit.
Paul, sorry, your slides are not moving, if you are moving them.
Well, I've moved one.
We can only see the title, the front page.
So
yeah, you'll need to click on the slideshow mode, please.
are they moving now?
No.
Well, I'm moving them my end, so it's just obviously not. It's not coming through. It's not coming through to you. Perhaps Dion, could I ask you to share them? There's obviously some problem with the sharing this end.
Yes, I'll quickly open that up. 1 second.
I'm sorry about that.
I'm getting there, sorry.
No, it's all right. Always take some time.
Second. Okay, I'm gonna move on the slides. You might be able to see this now. It's on the weak sustainability, the two worldviews. Thank you.
Yes,
we can see it.
Okay, well, thanks very much. That was the slide that I was on. So you can see there an absolutely explicit statement from Professor Partha Dasgupta outlining what's called the weak sustainability or inclusive wealth approach, where you express everything in money terms. And all the evidence suggests, and I'll show a slide or two about this, that this has led to a massive substitution of physical and manufactured capital and human capital for natural capital. So next slide, please, Dion. So these are the various kinds of capital that are calculated in the Inclusive Wealth Report, which is produced by a collaboration between the World Bank and the UN Environment Programme. So this has sort of become the standard way of thinking about these things. Various forms of natural capital given money values, then human capital and produced capital. Next slide, please. And you can see here the result of that. So the red line, the GDP per capita, and then you can see the various different forms of capital So the dotted line there showing a produced capital per capita. Then you can see that the other kinds of capital, human capital per capita, all going up very nicely. And you can see that little green line going down, which is natural capital, and that is how it's being depleted over those years. And then, of course, you add those money values together and you get the inclusive wealth per capita, which look as if they're going up. And if you look at that and interpret sustainability in those terms, there doesn't seem to be a problem. We are increasing the stock of capital overall, and that everything seems fine. And if you look at it on a per country basis, you get exactly the same. You get exactly the same perception that the most sustainable countries are the countries that are investing most heavily in human capital and produce capital, and the loss of natural capital is more or less hidden. Next slide, please. This is the Changing Wealth of Nations, which is the World Bank, similar World Bank publication. And you can see there that the pollution degradation is that tiny little green line, just sort of green block on the bottom of those pictures. You can see, but the other forms of capital are very much dominant. This is adjusted net savings, which is very much the same. It's the flow going through that changes the stock. And again, if you look at a picture like that, you would think actually that there's nothing to worry about. We are still very much in positive net saving territory. And that means, of course, that in that interpretation, the weak interpretation of sustainability, that we are sustainable. Next slide, please. And you compare that with the Living Planet Index for overall and for different various parts of the world, where we can see an absolutely catastrophic collapse of species and natural capital, which once you give that a money value and you then aggregate it with all the other forms of capital, is completely lost. And it was that kind of perception going back now, as I say, over 20 years, that led me and some European colleagues in a research program to formulate the underlying theoretical basis of the ESGAP framework. Next slide, please. So the strong sustainability worldview posits that the substitutability between these different forms of capital is limited. And by that, I mean that for some forms of natural capital, there is no substitutability, i.e., no other forms of capital can produce the same goods or services. And that therefore this kind of implied equivalence or trade-off between these different forms of capital is actually not valid. And this was very much reflected at the IUCN conference in Marseille a couple of years ago, where you can see that application of this concept suggested that we should maintain stocks of natural capital in their own right, rather than permitting them to be traded off. Next slide, please. So having decided that one needed a solution, obviously one needed to work out a methodology as to how to do that. So the first thought was that strong sustainability is actually a better description of the world we live in than weak sustainability. That the planetary boundaries concept, which really started in 2009, and there have been a number of scientific papers that have developed it significantly since then, the most recent in 2023, trying to apply that at the national level by finding from the scientific literature the science-based reference points which define the minimum level of natural capital that is required in order to produce the natural functions on which the economy and indeed human societies and life itself depends. It's interesting that the Inclusive Wealth Report itself suggests that that might be a better way of doing things, but thought that it would be rather difficult to do. And indeed, this is the work that Arkeitz did when he was at UCL and really implemented that. And he's going to talk about the South African report in a minute. Next slide, please. So what do? We identify the important ways that the natural environment contributes to human welfare, and we call these environmental functions. We define indicators based on these scientific environmental standards that show whether these functions are being delivered in a sustainable way at the desired level. We express these indicators at the national level because that's the level at which most environmental policy is carried out. And then for ESGAP, we aggregate these indicators together and produce two indices which show overall whether strong sustainability is being achieved, or the gap between current environmental performance and these standards, and what the trend is over time. And I'm just going to show a few results of those before I hand over to Arkeitz. Next slide, please. So here are the general features of the framework. We've got 4 different kinds of environmental functions: source, sink, life support, and human health and welfare functions. And those were developed very much in the work of David Pearce and Kerry Turner through the 1990s. They're structured around 7 broad sustainability principles, which I've listed there, and I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on that. Those of you who know the ecological economics literature pioneered by people like Herman Daly will be very familiar with those sorts of principles. And then it was Arkeitz's PhD that calculated this, that went through this procedure for 28 European countries, deriving 21 indicators, each with its own environmental standard. Next slide, please. So this is the structure that Arkeitz produced. So we've got at the center, we've got the Strong Environmental Sustainability Index, and I'll show you some results on that in a minute. Then the 4 kinds of environmental functions, then moving out the circle, the 7 sustainability principles, moving out to the next level of the circle, the environmental themes that we were able to identify scientific reference standards for, and then round the very outside, the 21 indicators relating to those environmental themes, which we were able to do the calculations for. Next slide, please. And this is the way the trend is constructed. So for a trend, obviously, you need at least 2 data points. You need a data point of where we were in the past, the data point of where we are with respect to these different indicators. You can see there those 2 bars. The red bars are the sustainability gap. So that shows the distance for each indicator between the performance at the date concerned, the distance between that performance and the environmental standard, which is the thick black line across the top. And then you join those 2 data points together and you get an observed trend, which is a simple straight line linear trend. But you might want to reach the standard by a certain date, and that's the desired trend. And the date in the calculations that Arkeitz did was 2030, which is the date for the Sustainable Development Goals to be reached. And so we thought that was an appropriate date. Probably if we did it again, we'd push a little further into the future, because it's only 5 years away now, and that's not very long. And then you can find the ratio between those 2 trends and normalize them to a number between 0 and 100. And that gives you the Strong Environmental Sustainability Progress Index, which is the second of the 2 indices that we calculate, SESP. Next slide, please. And these are the results for one of the European countries that we calculated. So this is the UK. And you can see the 4 functions down on the left. You can see the 21 indicators relating to each of those functions that are all listed there. And it gives policymakers an immediate sense of how far the current environmental performance is from the standard, and that's the length of the red bars. So you can see that for some of the standards, the standard is being met. So in the case of the UK, this is forest measures and ozone depletion. For some of the standards, we're very far from meeting them, and obviously climate change is the most obvious example for that, where we've still got everywhere to go to get to a sustainable level of carbon emissions. You can see that the life support functions are also pretty poor, the terrestrial ecosystem health functions. And down the side there on the right-hand side, you've got the various numbers. So the bold NI is the normalized index for the strong environmental sustainability index for each of the indicators. And when you aggregate that up, you get to 50 out of 100. That's a little better than the European average, but not much. And then if you look at the strong environmental sustainability performance index, and you see the TR, the trend, is it going in the wrong direction or the right direction? Those little arrows there, and the actual number for CESPI is 45 in that case. And these numbers are quite sensitive to policy improvements. So if the UK were to introduce environmental policies that reduce the size of those red bars, that would show up in the index. So it turns out that this is actually quite a good indicator, quite an intuitive indicator as to how environmental performance is doing compared to those scientific reference standards. Next slide, please. So we've just got some conclusions there. I've pretty well said all that. Systematic trade-off between natural capital and other forms of capital has brought about this triple crisis identified by the United Nations: climate, nature, and pollution. The weak sustainability mindset that has justified that trade-off needs to be abandoned. Strong sustainability needs to use science-based environmental standards to define this safe operating space for human activities. The dashboard of indicators needs to be defined at the national level, because that's where policy is made mainly. But these indicators need to be able to be aggregated, because we like single numbers. Policymakers like single figures. And the ESGAP approach fulfills these strong sustainability criteria through the development of those two indices. So thank you very much for your attention. Dion, you can stop sharing now, and we'll move on to Arkites, who will present the results of this exercise for South Africa.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, so yeah, that's a pretty stark view of the challenges ahead. Arkites, please go ahead.
Is this moving? Sorry.
Yeah, it did move from the first slide to this one.
But now it's not moving for me. Wait. Sorry. I think. Okay. Yeah, thanks for. I need to. Wait. Okay, yeah, thanks, Paul. So I'll be presenting now kind of the results of this pilot in South Africa. The goal here, and I think this is quite important to understand, is not to present, let's say a final product that it's carved in stone, but it's more to show the potential of this framework in terms of how it can promote a strong sustainability thinking in South Africa. And for some reason, the slide, okay. I think I will skip this because Paul has already mentioned that we've had different case studies, and well, there are different resources that you can take in case you are interested in the conceptual framework or the country results. I'll spend a bit of time on this because I think it's important that you understand basically what these two indices that we are proposing are measuring. The first one, SAIIA, the Strong Environmental Sustainability Index, it's giving us a snapshot at a given point in time in terms of how we are doing against what we call science-based environmental standards. And these standards are meant to represent sustainability conditions across a wide range of environmental topics. So we have, on the one hand, what that it's telling us, right now, are we environmentally sustainable or not? And like, what's the gap between those conditions and the current situation? And the second one, SESP, the Strong Environmental Sustainability Progress Index, that it's basically telling us whether we are moving in the right direction or not, whether we're making progress and whether this progress is enough. And this is comparing trends, kind of the trends that we observed and desired trends. So yeah, that's important to understand the results. I guess indicators that we've chosen, kind of it's one of the key features of let's say of this study to understand its implications. So the indicator selection process has been guided by the work that we did previously for European countries. But kind of the idea is that indicators are selected on 3 grounds. One is conceptual relevance, and I mean, in this framework, we understand environmental sustainability as the maintenance of the functions of natural capital. So it means that the indicators that we select first need to be related to those functions, but then they also need to have a reference value that tells us whether sustainability conditions are met or not. And these are what science-based environmental standards bring. And this means this is like very strict selection criteria. So it means that most of the environmental indicators that are out there, like cannot capture this strong sustainability perspective. Then there's also issues on methodological soundness and data quality. Overall, we've selected 19 indicators for South Africa. Kind of the year for which data is available changes sometimes, but in most cases, like it's 2021 or later. So it's providing like a decent picture of how South Africa is doing at the moment. There are more indicators, especially when it comes to the sync function, which is about the regulation of pollution, that it could have been included, but because data accessibility issues, so they haven't made it into the study. But in principle, kind of the data it's out there, and if with proper access, like it could be, they could be included. So in the end, we have this is kind of the structure on the index and the indicators. We have 4 indicators related to the exploitation of natural resources, renewables and non-renewables. We have 3 on different on pollution. 10 on like life support, which is related to ecosystem health and biodiversity. It's a bit tricky because because this is split into different type of ecosystems. So in practice, we're measuring ecosystem health on the one hand, and biodiversity in terms of threats or threat status. Sorry. On the other, but it's split into different types of species because into different types of species and ecosystems, because that's how the data was produced. And then we have indicators on like human health and welfare. In most of the cases, if you look at the indicator list, like the standard, it's already embedded in the name. And in the case of fish stocks, so kind of in South Africa, fish stocks are classified as not of concern or concern. So, we're looking at fish stocks in good condition. That basically it means not of concern. In the case of, I don't know, like ecosystem health and biodiversity, we are looking at ecosystems and species considered not threatened according to the red list criteria. So in every case, we are trying to capture like, whether those elements are in good condition or not. I think I'll skip this for the time's sake, but kind of the idea is that when we normalize the indicators, we get a score from 0 to 100, and 100 means we've met the environmental standard, 0 means the opposite. In terms of weighting we kind of use equal weights. There's no agreed method on what's the best way to do this. So for the sake of simplicity, we take equal weights. But I think it's important in the aggregation to understand that we are not aggregating with the normal average, the arithmetic mean, which, an arithmetic mean, if you have 5 and 95, the mean is 50. So poor performance is compensated linearly with good performance. We use a geometric mean that in practice penalizes low performances. So whenever you have like big problems, that's carried upwards towards the index score. And well, the same for SESP, but kind of here, basically what we are normalizing are trends. The results. Okay, I'll spend a bit of time on this one and the next one. South Africa scores 42 points. I'll forget a bit about what Paul mentioned about the UK because the results are not comparable. There are different sets of indicators. So this index is meant to be interpreted on its own. 42 points, it's a relatively low score, meaning that you have 58 points to go towards, let's say, environmental sustainability. Results change depending on the function. The highest score, it comes in life support, 57. But again, like 57 means that you have 43 to go. It's relatively low. And the lowest one you get on human health and welfare, you get 31 points. This is type of information that, if you need to show very aggregated figures to non-technical audiences, you can use this. Then there's this other part where, it's much more information rich. And you can see exactly in which areas South Africa is performing best and in which one is performing worse. The ones with a lot of red are freshwater resources, meaning that there's water scarcity conditions according to this indicator, like more water is abstracted than what it should be from an, let's say, pure environmental perspective. CO2 emission levels are highly unsustainable. This is something that we see virtually in every country in the world. That's actually the reason why we're moving towards net zero, because current emission levels are not sustainable. You see also poor performance in outdoor air pollution. So virtually like every person in South Africa is exposed to particulate matter levels that are higher than those recommended by the World Health Organization. And you also see especially in water ecosystems, like if you see in the life support, that you get a lot of red. You get a lot of red when it comes to drinking water pollution and recreational water pollution, also in freshwater eutrophication. So it's a very visual way of seeing where like most problems are. You have obviously kind of also indicators where there's good performance, like ozone depleting substances. So when it comes to the ozone layer, like South Africa is doing very well. When it comes to indoor air pollution, that this is represented by like the share of the population that has like clean cooking fuels, and South Africa has made a lot of progress over time on that. Still a bit more to go, but a very high score. So yeah, this is just to show you like the type of information that ESGAP can provide. When we look at trends, we get an index score of 23 out of 100, suggesting that there's many indicators where that are not moving in the right direction. In the case of zinc, for example, you saw CO2 emissions, like the emissions are unsustainable, but we see that indicator is moving in the right direction. But we see in others, there's a lot of 19 or 12 of the 19 indicators are showing negative trends. So, probably more action is needed to reverse these trends. About these findings, you need to understand. So what this framework is bringing to the table is strong sustainability and how to measure them. like environmental sustainability at the national level. Like there's a lot of theory behind the framework, and this is kind of there's a very close link between these metrics and basically all the concept behind. Kind of the main novelty of what these indices are bringing is the use of science-based environmental standards. When you look at other indices, many times progress is being measured against policy targets that might be more lenient than environmental standards, and they also often measure performance against front runners. So, 100 doesn't mean you are sustainable, but 100 means you are the best one in the sample. And these metrics can provide messages at two different levels. As we've mentioned, there's more aggregated information that can be used to communicate either to non-technical audiences or to, let's say, high-level policymakers that don't have that much time to read reports. So, you can provide targeted messages with this type of metrics, and then you have more information at a dashboard, like for more technical audiences and for those that actually, policy analysts and those that need to define what's done about these areas. We've checked a lot of resources. I mean, we've run pilots in different parts of the world. Somewhere they didn't have a good data infrastructure, and it's not the case in South Africa. There's a lot of reports providing information on a lot of indicators. So, I mean, South Africa could potentially take up this framework if you see that there's value in it. And it's quite interesting that there's in the South African Environment Report, which is, I think, produced every year, there's a set of headline indicators that are basically vary from year to year, and this could actually be like a good place to showcase ESGAP, because most of the information that are presented come from South African statistics. There are some international databases, but a lot of it comes from South African statistics. Policy recommendations. I mean, if there are questions about this, perhaps Dion could take them in the sense that he knows the South African policy context way better than I do. But we thought about four main areas. One is about mainstreaming strong sustainability metrics into national climate commitments. So when the NDCs are revised, like having these type of metrics around and looking at how, especially like mitigation, greenhouse gas mitigation measures affect these other areas, could ensure that there are no negative trade-offs between climate action and other environmental areas. When it comes to public and private investment, it would be useful to at least to assess how these let's say strategic investments affect these type of indicators, whether they move them towards sustainability or not. There's a third one that deals with aligning policy targets with science-based environmental standards. We see, I mean, in other case studies as well, that sometimes policy targets are more lenient than environmental standards. So progressively, I think we should move towards aligning those. And then basically try to bring this strong sustainability thinking into municipal development plans, but basically it's to any level beyond, let's say, the national level where decisions are taken, because kind of there are kind of municipalities, regions have different competences that are relevant to move towards sustainability. So the conclusions, and this is the last slide. Again, kind of we wanted to show the potential of the framework to inform South African policy making and also like indicator reporting. we have a process ongoing with the European Environment Agency on how this could be integrated, and obviously kind of requires more work than just, this is a report. Like, this should be owned by those using it. So if there's interest, I can speak about that process a bit. And the rest, I think I've already mentioned, like the potential of these metrics to provide messages at different levels. I think this concept of science-based environmental standards can be used to develop like a long-term vision of how a country's environment should be. And this, for example, speaks to the National Development Plan beyond 2030. So, if strong stability were to be integrated there, like kind of this concept could be used to promote a strong sustainability thinking in development strategies. And yeah, there's clear potential, especially in this South African Environment Report, to kind of start bringing this perspective through the headline indicators. So yeah, that's it. Thanks a lot, and happy to take questions towards the end of the webinar.
Thank you so much, guys. I think the data-driven approach to getting a holistic picture of the South African context is very important for decision makers. I'm going to now hand over to Professor Mark Swilling to give us his insight into and contextualize the research into the South African context. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Greetings to everybody. Greetings, Paul, and our UCL colleagues, and thanks, Dion, for setting this up and convening such a great group of people, a significant number of participants. Yeah, I think this is very very timely. There's quite a number of different initiatives within the South African context that impinge in one way or another on, if we can call it more broadly, sustainability transitions. And Haley is associated with the SA National Biodiversity Studies, that collaboration that we have with AFD to interpret the economic impacts of biodiversity deterioration across different sectors. So you take water and you look at the negative impacts on the various South African economic sectors, or any other natural resource. So that is a very sophisticated piece of work based on a modeling exercise, which really, I think, engages nicely with this strong sustainability approach. There is a completely different piece of work that we're doing in CST with the National Treasury and the National Planning Commission and the Development Bank of Southern Africa, which is probably, from this perspective, weak sustainability. And what we are doing is building a non-equilibrium model in order to assess the macroeconomic implications of the energy transition. And it's a non-equilibrium model because we are endogenizing finance, which CGE models don't do. And so they're quite disconnected from the real economy as a result. And we're also endogenizing a climate damage factor. And when it's Colombia has done this, and we're kind of following building on the Colombian model that AFD developed, and we're working with AFD on this model. And so those two pieces of work are really, I would say, the sister projects of this initiative. They're system-wide analyses of the state, if you like, of sustainability. One is much more with respect to our core challenge, the energy transition, and the other with respect to biodiversity and natural resources. And I mean, the other piece of work that relates to that, this obviously talks to, which has already been mentioned, is the NDC. So so the Presidential Climate Commission and others have collaborated to update our NDC. And there's recent work that has been done, which is also modeling based, to assess to develop an updated NDC, which is also very challenging. And as far as I know, the agreement couldn't really be reached on that within the Presidential Climate Commission. But it talks to, as I already mentioned, this ESGAP could significantly relate. So I think there's different bodies of work underway. I suppose we should also mention the extensive climate modeling work that has taken place over a number of years. So these different bodies of work are significant and point to the challenge we face in the South African context to deal with the implementation of sustainability goals. And it's a challenging environment to do that, given our high levels of coal dependence and therefore emissions on the one hand, and our very fragile biodiversity resources that are deteriorating on the other. And so I think this ESGAP study really helps to reinforce a more strong sustainability perspective. So yeah, I think it's very welcome and a very constructive contribution.
Thank you, Mo.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for that contextualizing and broadening of the discussion. I now hand over to our moderator for the panel discussion, Dr. Haley Clements, to start the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dion, and good morning to you all. Apologies for my voice. I still have enough of a voice, at least, to moderate this hopefully very interesting discussion. And many thanks to our speakers for introducing this project really nicely. So to start, we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion. I've got some questions for our three panelists, which include Ms. Marie-Hélène Loyson from AFD, Dr. Mapula Salenga from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, and also Mr. Mahlodi Tau from the South African National Biodiversity Institute. So we're going to have a panel discussion and then follow that with a Q&A. I've got some questions for our other speakers as well to probe a bit deeper into some of the things we learned from them, and then we'll open it up for a broader conversation with the audience as well. So to our three panelists, an opening question which I would like to hear from all of you on is that this report provides quite a clear diagnosis, but it would be nice to talk a little bit more about the treatment. If you could prioritize a single recommendation that comes out of this report for immediate government action, what would it be and why? So maybe these can be just short reflections to start with. Really, what is the one key recommendation for you that comes out of this report? And I think we can start with Ms. Loyson to hear from you on your key recommendation.
Well, maybe before I answer, I think it's really interesting to hear from South African government and partners, because as I said in the introduction, the goal of the report is really to make more informed policy choices. So I think at the end, it's really a tool that we hope will be useful for policymakers to decide, based on these recommendations, which one is more important and should be prioritized in the definition of trajectory pathway for South African development.
Thanks, Ms. Loyson. So I think that sets up nicely to go to our departmental colleagues. So perhaps first to Dr. Salenga, what really strikes you from this report as a kind of take-home recommendation relevant to DFFE?
Good morning, or just before good day, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for a very timely, useful report. So for me, I think, well, there's no denying that we are not moving in the good direction as we would want to in terms of the strong sustainability. When I look at the report, it resonates what the state of environment is also saying. I think for me, of course, this is a socio-ecological indicator. It's very difficult to say which one to prioritize, but I think more it's broadly mainstreaming. I support the mainstreaming, but the question is how. I think for me, and it's almost like an advice to the research team, is this report shouldn't just be publishing and then you leave it there, because if you really want to mainstream, you need long-term to be engaged in long-term policy processes, because there's policy development, implementation, and you shouldn't only wait for the M&E step. And there's a lot of work happening with the NDC, which is already identifying specific adaptation goals and tracking mechanisms. So once the NDC is finalized, we are also working with the implementation of the Climate Change Act, which are working with sectors that are developing their adaptation strategies for coastal, all these sectors, biodiversity, agriculture. So if you miss that boat when we are developing those risks and vulnerabilities and response plans and there are no indicators there, we're also working with the district municipalities in terms of the act. Also, they are also doing their risk and vulnerabilities, which are also linked to the National Treasury's Circular 88, which is the indicators that are legally regulated. So if you miss that boat, you will not be able to mainstream. The report may sit there and collect dust. So I think it's more of an ongoing science policy and society interface as opposed to only publishing the report, but maybe looking forward to how best can we mainstream as an ongoing process. Thanks.
Thanks so much for those reflections, Mapula, and I completely agree about the importance of ongoing mainstreaming. And you mentioned for example, one of the processes currently is the nationally determined contributions, which comes out of the report. Our Kai spoke about this as kind of a key recommendation, is that this framework and the findings could be mainstreamed into the NDCs to kind of prevent trade-offs between maybe climate responses and impacts on other aspects of the environment. And so I'd be interested maybe just to come back to you to probe a bit further on that, about how DFFE maybe could use this ESGAP and the findings that came out of this to more holistically or more holistically in the climate strategy in ways that also protect biodiversity and public health. So if you have any ideas, to elaborate on this recommendation that perhaps this work could mainstream into the NDCs, does it strike you as some maybe obvious ways in which that could be done?
Yeah, there are obvious ways. I mean, the NDC has got specific goals that relates to water, ecosystem, fresh water, and ecological infrastructure, and it's got specific ways of monitoring the progress. And some of those areas are similar to what ESGAP is doing. But parallel to that, so I mean, the NDC is probably going to be approved sometime in this month. That might mean whatever that's already there in the draft, it's cast in stone. But then it's a matter of saying, how do you make sure that when we implement the NDC, you are part of the process? Because the next process that's also happening in terms of the Climate Change Act is that the Act says we need to have scenarios, objectives, and indicators for adaptation. So when we have those conversations, that is when you need to be bringing in typical indicators. But also, earlier speaker spoke about the state of environment headline indicators, which are changing every year in terms of what is important this year. So once the NDC has been approved by Cabinet and submitted to the UNFCCC, these indicators, you need to make sure that you then are part of the national process of domesticating the NDC. And that will link to, I mean, agriculture, and oceans, for example. There's an oceans adaptation strategy already, or action plan. and there's also agriculture. There's many sector plans that are relating to climate adaptation. So practically you need to be on the ground. Like now, in terms of the act, in the next 3 years, we are helping districts, 44 districts, to develop their climate response plans. Almost every second week, I'm in different provinces and districts where we're working together as adaptation and mitigation teams to help these district colleagues with revising their risk and response strategies. So if you are absent during those conversations, in the next 3 years, we would have done 44 district climate response plans. And if you're not part of that, it would be very difficult to start mainstreaming at the end.
Thanks, Mapula. So maybe just to probe a bit deeper on some of these processes that you've shared with us, because what I'm hearing you say is already embedded in the NDC is a consideration of the biodiversity aspects and implications, which I think is quite reassuring, because that speaks to the strong sustainability component that or paradigm that Prof. Paul and others have spoken about. Would you agree with that this kind of strong sustainability perspective is also very much embedded within the NDC and other policy processes, or could it be strengthened?
I think compared to the first NDC, there has been a step in the right direction in terms of improving from NDC 1, which was weak on the socio-ecological aspect. So there is progress in that element. But in terms of the extent, of course, it's contagious. What is enough for South Africa as a developing country to balance also other pressing socio-ecological issues? But when I look at the NDC now, there is improvement in terms of the intent, but it's a matter of how much can we really push, but then how will we then measure? And that is why, as a country, then when we develop the adaptation scenarios and the indicators, that is when it will then we'll be able to measure how strong or how weak is then our sustainability. So with these new sets of goals, we can be able to then from the beginning say whether we are going to go to the right direction or not. So it will be important that for every ESGAP indicator, you are able to look at the NDC and say, with this rate, we will not make it or we'll make it by 2030 or 2040. So already there's a new scope for you to further elaborate in terms of the NDC.
Thanks. Yes, that's certainly something we can come to some of the presenters on as well to understand a bit more about how they measure the progress indicator and how, that kind of horizon scanning could be helpful. I have one other question for you, which comes back to what you also mentioned about, for example, the state of the environment, headline indicators which change each year, etc. A key finding that also came out of this work was the poor and deteriorating state of our freshwater ecosystems. And so it would be helpful to hear a little bit more about what is being done, what more could be done, etc., to integrate the protection of ecological infrastructure, particularly healthy rivers and wetlands, into, for example, our national water security and other plans. And if this, freshwater systems features commonly in these headline indicators.
Can I pass that to my colleague, Matlodi? I'm a social-technical person, so now you're getting too socio-ecological. Okay. So I'll hand over to Matlodi, Sanbi, our entity.
All right. I was going to go to him next, so that works perfectly. Thank you so much for your insights, Ms. Salenga. Okay, Mr. Mafodi Tau from the South African National Biodiversity Institute. I don't see him. Is he still with us? Maybe his camera's just off.
I'm on my phone, yes, but I'm here.
Would you like me to repeat the question that just got passed over to you?
When she was speaking, I was preparing the first one. I wanted to also react on the first question that you've asked, because it's also on the recommendations that I really liked. So thank you. My name is Matlodi Tau. I'm with SANBI, the South African National Biodiversity Institute. And when you ask a question about the recommendation and what was key for me, I was noting those recommendations down as he was presenting there. There's one around aligning national policy targets with science-based environmental standards. So what that means for me, for SANBI, for our partners in the sector, is because it's as someone said, these findings are timely. They come at the right time. I think so that they really do come at the right time, because now the conservation sector, we are now embarking on the review of our NBSAP, National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. That is our roadmap for the next 10 years for conserving biodiversity and its sustainable use. So in the NBSAP, what we are going to capture and highlight in there is the national priorities, the actions, the commitments as a country to address the biodiversity loss and meets our national and global targets. So it's a requirement for the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity. But beside that, it's something that is really, really important for us as a country, that we develop this roadmap. So where we are at, because the existing NBSAP is a 10-year that was developed in 2015, ending now in this year, 2025. So we are reviewing that. But what made sense for me, this recommendation around the providing the science and the evidence, is that through the process that we've embarked on now, there's this buzzword about a whole of society. So we are trying to be as inclusive as we can. We've established a number of working groups or focus groups per thematic areas that we want to ensure that they are highlighted in the NBSAP. The focus groups on issues ranging from biodiversity finance to biodiversity economy to local government, marine related issues. But what then becomes important, and where this the ESGAP and what the findings now, how they become important for us, is this focus group that we've now established, which also represent a wide range of representatives of our society, is what's going to inform their discussions. What is it that's going to inform that? That's where I think the ESGAP findings becomes very important, because they provide us with not just the status quo, but the evidence, science-based evidence that we need to take into these focus groups that we've established, and not only to say what are the findings telling us. There's something that I liked around, are we embedding strong sustainability plans into what we are doing? So these focused groups that we've established, there are 19 of them, representing communities, academics, policy practitioners, academics, the private sector, to have a conversation about our next 10 years. But for me, is what then will sustainability mean in action on the ground? And it's something that we will need to ensure that these focus groups, they also have that conversation when they think about this roadmap and our priorities for the next 10 years. Do we have this sustainability in mind? So this conversation we are having now, it will trigger that. So it means it's the responsibility of us as SANBI that we really have a good understanding of what we are hearing here, what this framework is about, the findings that were highlighted here, and also think, how do we then take this into the focus groups? Because that we will, whatever that comes out of those 19 focus groups, that's what's going to become our plan, our roadmap for the next 10 years. And this roadmap, it must embed this sustainability thinking. But I think so today's conversation is actually opening our minds. We are also learning. So when we go into these groups, we also have an understanding of what will that mean to think sustainably, and also look at these findings that we are hearing here, because if we cannot embed the sustainability that we are talking about into the NBSAP, because it's our Bible that will be referring to guide our work in the biodiversity sector. So we will need to ensure that we take what we are hearing from the ESGAP into the NBSAP processes. And we've just had a first round. We had a national stakeholder conversation. We had the first round of this many groups that we've established. That conversations are ongoing there. So it's our responsibility to then, our responsibility with the Institute of International Affairs to take these findings into these NBSAP processes, to have sustainability at the center of this roadmap that we are trying to develop now. If we don't do that, we will come back in the next 5-10 years and say things are not going well. But beside that, I was impressed to hear that we are not doing bad. We are performing much better in terms of our life support functions. That is encouraging, and that is what must go into these focus groups, to hear that yes, there's a lot of work to be done, but the findings are encouraging, should be motivating all of us to now embed this sustainability into this NBSAP processes. I think that's something that we will need to do as SANBI, as we are the one leading together with, we work with DFFE, but we are the one facilitating these many groups that we've established so that they can inform our roadmaps. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Tau. And I think, part of this is applauding SANBI and DFFE, etc. for our Kites mentioned in his talk, South Africa does have good data, which helps this process of assessing these, where we are at in terms of strong sustainability, because of the data that's already been collected. I'm interested in your reflection of the value of the science-based standards approach, because the indicators, at least in the life support system, the kind of species and ecosystem indicators that are used are the proportion of species and ecosystems that are considered threatened or not threatened according to the IUCN. And that is the good work that SANBI and others have done to make those assessments. So I would argue that those science-based, the standards are already embedded in the work that that you're doing in the NBSAPs, etc. But what I'm hearing you say is that articulating it in terms of strong sustainability, thinking about trajectories of change or progress is a really helpful framing in how you make sense of what you find. So I'm interested if that's a fair reflection. And a follow-up on that, in terms of these science-based standards, it's as Paul and our Kite said, is it's kind of they're self-reporting. It's like, is it a threatened ecosystem or not? And what number of ecosystems are threatened or not? But linking this back into kind of the policy world, does South Africa, or is it put in the NBSAP, any kind of target about how many ecosystems are acceptable to be threatened? Or is it just articulated that we need to restore or curb more ecosystems becoming threatened? Like, is there any kind of actual national target around what I would call those science-based standards to move kind of away from threatened ecosystems or threatened life support systems? Is that a fair question? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So we all our, because we recognize that our economy, the growth of our economies, it depends on the healthy functioning ecosystems. So all our ecosystem, we would like to ensure that they are indeed functioning, they are able to deliver the services that are required, and what we have as part of this process, what we're going to have, because we also there's okay, let me not go into the the global biodiversity framework that people may not be aware, because in there are targets as well. And there is a target 3 that talks about the conservation and protection of our ecosystems. And it gives us how much for this decade till 2030, how much a representation that we will need to conserve. That's target 3. That's where you hear we talk about 30 by 30 is the 30% that needs to be conserved. And that 30%, it's for all our ecosystems. We want to ensure that we indeed conserve all our ecosystems. So in addition to us looking at the biomes, like your grasslands that we are really concerned about, what we are also now able to do is to add also what we call strategic water source areas. This is simply for other people that may not, this what people will. So we've mapped those mountain catchments. We are now in a process to set the targets of how much of that representative do we need to be conserving by 2030. So we are putting those targets, and this NBSAP, all of that must be captured in this NBSAP for the next 10 years. But we know that the CBD now we are marching towards the 2030 agenda. So we need to set those targets, and those targets, for us to set those, we are releasing the National Biodiversity Assessment reports now. In December, there's an official launch. So we will need to look at what the science is saying that coming out of the National Biodiversity Assessment reports. But now we have something really great, not just to look at those numbers. What I like here is that we look at that, but we bring sustainability in those conversations, so that it's not just about the species and the ecosystem and the numbers, but is the sustainability. Because by bringing this word sustainability, it means now we are linking to what Mike Swelling was talking about. We are linking those targets, which may be ecosystem targets, we are linking them to our socio-economic development, to poverty issues. You see, it gives us, sustainability gives us so much more. But it's good that it's coming through the science that coming out of this ESGAP framework, that we will be able to bring that in, and we will need to, it's our responsibility now to look at what came out of this using the sustainability lens, and the National Biodiversity Assessments reports that's coming out soon. That will be important to inform the targets that we need to set for 2030. But in the NBSAP is the targets until 2035. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much. Just one more follow-up question, coming back to the question that Dr. Salenga passed on to you. You mentioned now the strategic water source areas and the NBA that's about to be released, the National Biodiversity Assessment. Could you give us a little sneak peek in terms of what it says there about, the state of our freshwater ecosystems, which is what the ESGAP, flags as kind of the main red area in the life support system component, and kind of what can be done or plans there are to better integrate the healthy rivers and wetlands as ecological infrastructure into our development plans in South Africa.
Unfortunately, I do not have that sneak peek. It's the team that is based in Cape Town. I'm in the division called Biodiversity Information and Policy Advice. So it's the Biodiversity Research Assessment and Monitoring Division of SANBI. So the majority of that team, they're based in Cape Town. They are the one that have that sneak peek. What we were able to engage on was some of the key messagings that are coming out of the NBA report, but I think we will have to wait and see when this NBA is launched in December what is coming out of there strongly around the freshwater ecosystem. But we know the 2018 one didn't put a good picture on our freshwater ecosystem, especially our wetlands and rivers, the least protected and most threatened, and that's why now, and with the work that we are doing around strategic water source areas, that is our response to the 2018 National Biodiversity Assessment reports, to saying we are in trouble. And if you look at the National Development Plan, what is saying there it makes logical sense. You don't have to go to university to know about the importance of water and what it means for the developmental agenda of any country. So our work around investing in ecological infrastructure for water security, this strategic water source area work that we are doing, is a response to what we have seen from the 2018 NBA report, and we are hard at work. Our interventions, they are varied. Enabling environment, where we look at the policy instrument working with the Department of Water and Sanitation, and you may be aware, it looks like you know about SANBI, that we are an accredited entity of the Green Climate Fund, and what we are trying to do, because normally we will receive resources from the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, $5 to $8 million. The Green Climate Facility, it allows us to really go at a large scale. We've just recently secured $40 million, and part of that $40 million is to invest in ecosystem-based reduction, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. So how do we manage droughts, flooding, and fire? And if you look at what we will be doing, managing drought, floods, fire, what is important there? Our freshwater ecosystem. If you talk about issues of drought, besides just land management improvements, improving our communal rangeland, the freshwater ecosystems, our rivers and wetlands are key. So the resources that we've received, we will be using those resources to invest in the freshwater ecosystems. But I don't have much to say about what is the sneak peek now, but I appreciate what I'm seeing from the ESGAP report, which I think it's likely to be the same, where they're talking about water scarcity and the ecological state of our rivers and wetlands, that they're far from being sustainable. I think we will see similar trends even out of our National Biodiversity Assessment report. But we are hard at work to respond on that through the policy and action on the ground. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much. I think that was a little bit of a sneak peek, but even if it wasn't a deep sneak peek, I think what you demonstrated there so nicely in your response is this mainstreaming that Dr. Salenga also emphasized as her recommendation. The work coming out of the NBA, for example, that is guided by research, much like the ESGAP, actually did get mainstreamed into, for example, strategic water source areas, etc., to address some of the issues coming out of the NBA. And so I hope that the same comes from this ESGAP, as you said. Now, perhaps this strong sustainability narrative around this work can help that mainstreaming as well. So thanks for giving us some insight into some of those processes. And I think maybe just a reflection before we come back to Ms. Loesan is I think we have things to learn from the South Africa case, which I've mentioned already, is the value of good data to help meaningfully quantify things like the ESGAP framework, and that is thanks to SANBI, DFFE, etc. But also the maybe better state of our life supporting systems compared to elsewhere in the world, which is not just about our protected areas, but also our diverse forms of our recognition and enablement of diverse conservation models, which goes beyond state protected areas to biodiversity stewardship, which is also something that's very much enabled by the department, our focus on the biodiversity economy, etc. So I think lots to learn from the successes, if not also from the weak points in terms of the ESGAP findings. So maybe with that, we can come back to Ms. Loyson. And my question that you wanted to first hear from our government partners on, if what really strikes you as the treatment to come from this diagnosis.
Yeah, maybe one reflection I had listening to our partners and reading, the recommendation is, of course, when you look at the results, well, you see some indicators are going in the right direction or going in the wrong direction, and some are more concerning than others, obviously. And so, of course, you think, well, of course, we should focus on those who are moving in the wrong direction or those who are more concerning. But at the same time, and this is where the trade-off or dilemma may come across, you don't want either that your indicators that are good or moving in the right direction, you don't want them to deteriorate over time. So this is a little bit of the trade-off, is how you put more resources to areas where you see things are deteriorating, but at the same time, you also have to maintain the effort and the investments into those areas where things are okay or progressing in the right direction. And so I think this is really the also the value added of that report, is to show also the connection between these indicators and to have this holistic approach where somehow you need to pull all these strings together to try to move everything together in the right direction. So I think this is really one of the big value added of those recommendations and report, is to have this global view and understand the connections between the different areas.
Thank you. I think that's such an important reflection. I see Mark also has his hand up. Mark, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's significant that AFD is a partner here, and AFD is a DFI that works closely with the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And what was said now were repeated references to investment in. And that raises the question of, well, who do we imagine is investing in what here and why, and in return for what? And I think we need to make that explicit, because if I go back to the beginning of Paul's talk, where a weak sustainability position allows you to conclude, don't worry, be happy, we're heading in the right direction. And what that means is, don't worry, be happy, allow investments to continue to remain path dependent, which reproduces a weak sustainability. And so if you want strong sustainability, you actually have to rethink the way capital is allocated. So it takes you back to the financial system. And both Paul and I have been working on that in the International Resource Panel in various ways. But we've just finished a report for the National Planning Commission that is the first ever analysis of the architecture of South Africa's financial ecosystem. And it's precisely to identify these path dependencies that have reproduced the mineral energy complex and a coal-dependent economy and an economy that depends on the deterioration of natural capital. That's South African capital. That's how it is structured. It's extractive. And if you want a non-extractive economy, there has to be a redirection and of the flow of capital. And that in turn is dependent on an understanding of how it works. And most of these, I would say 95% of conversations about sustainability, strong or weak, that I'm involved in, finance is never ever mentioned. It's taken for granted. Somehow you get the policy frameworks right, you get your indicators right, and once the policymakers have made their decisions, finance is going to follow suit. Doesn't happen that way. Finance has got its own rules. It has its own rules of the game which don't align with policy. And so we actually have to pay attention to that. And I think that's where that other piece of work that we've just finished, which will come out in the next few weeks, will talk nicely to this particular framework. And I'm hoping to see. Yeah, I mean, I suppose my hidden agenda is to educate the sustainability community about finance. I don't have much hope that the finance community will ever understand sustainability, but there's a better chance of the other way around, I think.
Thanks so much for that, Mark. I'd like to hear if Ms. Looysen wants to perhaps respond to that, and in particular reflecting on, as Mark said, the role of DFIs like AFD in perhaps redirecting finance flows, and how something like the ESGAP can actually help guide that.
Yes, sure. And in fact, it's a good complement to Mark's agenda, because our agenda is to educate the finance community about sustainability. So I guess together we can reach something. But yes, and maybe to start with AFD. So that is something, of course, that we have been working on for some time to better integrate sustainability issues across our financing operations. And to do that, about 10 years ago, we have established a tool and a mechanism through which we assess each and every one of our financing against the main dimensions, in fact, of sustainability. So whether it's climate mitigation, adaptation, economic resilience, social development, governance, biodiversity, etc. And so we measure, we have this screening and rating so that we make sure that all our financing generates positive impacts and mitigate and avoid negative impacts. And what is also interesting through this instrument is that sometimes we do get dual rating. So for example, in one dimension, you'll get positive impacts, and on another dimension, you may get some negative impacts. And of course, the goal is to mitigate and reduce and avoid these negative impacts as much as possible. But sometimes it is not possible. And sometimes we do have to decide, well, do we think that the positive impacts on one side can justify that somehow we may have some negative impacts, although we will try to reduce them as much as possible. So this is in our operations, and this is where our commitment to be 100% aligned with SDG makes sense. And of course, as you were mentioning, it's not only about our operations, it's also how we can help other partners, other institutions to move in that direction as well. And so, in fact, in our nature roadmap, we have both specific objectives in terms of our financing. So, for example, one of our targets was to have 1 billion euro of nature positive finance by 2025, and we actually reached that target a year in advance last year. But another target is also to redirect financial flows, and the way we're doing that is twofold. One is working with partners to help them define strategies and implement these strategies, develop tools and trainings to, in fact, do the same. So make sure that their financing is also sustainable and nature positive. So this is something we do more and more, with all of our clients, whether public banks, sovereign corporates, whatever. And also we work quite a lot, as you may know, in terms of building coalitions to make sure that the whole system of public development banks move in that direction, and trying to harmonize as much as possible the way we work. And also do the mapping, because that's important to have the same tools to be able somehow to aggregate and make sure that we are generating together as much as possible of financing that supports sustainable development. So this is what we do, for example, through the Finance in Common Coalition, where we're working with multilateral, but also bilateral and national development banks to move in that direction.
Thank you very much for giving us that insight in terms of the diverse ways in which AFD is really trying to shift the dial to more of a kind of systems perspective, and this, really the strong sustainability perspective on directing finance and understanding the potential system-wide implications of that. Mark, would you like to reflect on what Ms. Loyson has said, also given CST's work with the DFIs?
Yeah, so we're working with the African Association of DFIs, which is there are about just over 100 DFIs in Africa, most of them quite small and fairly weak. So we're working with them to strengthen their capacity, mainly to access climate finance and to influence their own financial ecosystems within their own context. But I think what I would like to mention is a new piece of work that we're starting with South African pension funds. So arising from the report that we did for the National Planning Commission, the pension funds, which are quite heavily criticized in that report, are actually, to my surprise, in agreement with the criticism. They are completely frank in saying, yes, we are massively investing in South African infrastructure. And so they've agreed to fund a 2-year project in order to collaborate with them around how to think about the construction of a pipeline of projects that are investable. So the challenge that we're going to face is that it's not going to be difficult to come up with a pipeline of hard infrastructure projects like the transmission grid build program. But it's much harder to make the case for green infrastructure, to use Matlodi's word. And because there isn't a direct relationship between investment and return when it comes to most green infrastructure. The return is systemic. So you're investing in a project where the return is not direct, it's indirect, and the time frame is much greater. And so the kind of capital that is then required for those kinds of investments is very different. And so the pension fund's response to that is, and this puts the ball back in Mapula's court. The pension fund response is, listen, we're used to buy government bonds, and the assumption was the government would then use to use that capital to invest in public interest projects, but we no longer trust the state. So the old relationship between private capital, bonds, government bonds, public investments for the public good, and for the good of the economy has broken down because of state capture and so on and so forth. And so now you have to make a completely different argument. And do you do that through green bonds? Do you do that through impact investment? So a whole new circuit of capital is being constructed or trying to be imagined because of the breakdown of the old system, because of the breakdown of the state. So in short, how do you make the case for investment in green infrastructure under those conditions? And we have to do this. We can't wait to rebuild the state. That might take a generation.
Yeah, I think such important reflections and things, we constantly grapple with. And I think, the difficulty is that we then often fall back to the trying to articulate it in terms of financial capital, the value of green infrastructure, which comes back to what Paul was talking about, is like weak sustainability. So such a challenge. And I think you mentioned, Paul, in your and Mark, in your initial reflections, some of the other work that we have going on, and our other project working with the macroeconomic team at AFD around quantifying nature-related risks to the economy. It talks about risks in two ways. The one is physical risk, which is what you're speaking about now, which, there's a big potentially time lag, especially if we're talking about, planetary boundaries, which seems to be kind of the conceptual underpinning of these standards in this work. But there's also the transition risk, which is, there's a global movement to say we can't keep doing this. We need to protect more, etc. And, that's coming from like the international policy space, but it's also coming from people, who dictate where their money goes, etc. And so that's kind of making the case that, corporates, but also countries are going to have to increasingly clamp down on things that are detrimental to green infrastructure. And that kind of risk is also real. But how do we quantify that and quantify that risk, how that risk will impact macroeconomies, but also corporates to make the case for the transition effectively. But so just that, there is that distinction, I think, between physical risk, which is harder and there's a lag, but also more of this transition risk. Yeah, I see we have many hands up. This is a lovely conversation. So maybe we should go to Dr. Salenga first, because Mark specifically called you back to action, and then go over to Ms. Loisan, and then it would be great to hear from Paul and Archives as well. I also have some questions for you around some of the kind of the method. So over to you first, Ms. Dr. Salenga, and maybe also to say, we'd like to hear from the audience as well. So if anybody has questions or comments, please join this conversation now as well, and I'll keep track of what comes up in the chat.
Thanks. So the way I would respond is partly in a way of critique to the ESGAP. Firstly, to say there's a problem where you are choosing certain indicators because of data availability and quality. So maybe what you could do is have a list of what other ideal indicators would you have liked to include, so that we can get a sense of, because at the moment it might look like this is a definition of strong sustainability, but in reality it's because it's based on what you could get your hands on. And having said that, I think the next issue is, besides being strongly ecological indicators, how then do you bring social and economic indicators? Because that is where then the balance between the three is always the issue. So if you put these ones on the side without putting then the social and the economic indicators, which are often driving the agenda, that will also then always be a problem of going then in the wrong direction. And for me also, it's about saying, when you look at these indicators, how can, when you do a strength test on them in terms of climate adaptation impacts, to what extent does climate change impacts affect the direction of, how does it exacerbate some of these changes? To what extent it's beyond the natural, but also how the balance between us as human beings, we have exacerbated that. The one indicator that I think I'll always partly have a problem with is, and I think South Africa, we may never get it right, is the one, because on climate change you are using per capita. I think we will probably always be on the red on that one. Partly also then, I mean, if you look at the NDC, already when it comes to the NDC, we are doing kind of okay with a range. And that range has considered the socioeconomic issues. But then also when you look at, the South Africa's emissions have been going down since the global crisis and the ESCOM crisis in 2008. And the industry is saying, but what else can we do? I mean, if you look at even the integrated resource plan, it's trying its best now to incorporate decisions that are based also on emissions. So I think my interesting thorny issue with the climate change indicator is the use of the per capita measure, and whether we will at any point in this lifetime get it right. Thanks.
It would be nice to hear from Mark and also from Paul and our kites about that. A question I actually had to Mark is this, and I think to Paul and our kites as well, is that we are very much talking about the outer part of the donut here, the kind of outer planetary boundary, where of course on the inside we've got kind of our social boundaries and goals as well. So how does this fit into a just transition, which is what Dr. Tsalenga is now talking about in terms of, well, first it would be nice to hear about what other indicators help the ESGAP itself, but also how we intersect that with the kind of inner part of the donut. So maybe if Mark wants to reflect on that, and then maybe we can also go to Prof. Ekins and to our Kais, and then we'll come back to Ms. Loison as well.
Well, I mean, there's the way the notion of a just transition is used in the South African debate can be quite confusing, because it's used in 4 different ways. The one is decarbonize as quickly as possible in order to accelerate economic growth, and then through trickle down you'll have jobs. That's just. The second position is no, you've got to decarbonize for economic growth, but you must have welfare interventions to mitigate the impact of coal closure. So that's welfarism. And then the third position is decarbonization, yes, with welfare interventions, but upstream and up and downstream green industrialization. So in other words, use the transition to reindustrialize. And the JET IP moved the dial from the second to the third position. The fourth position is articulated by unions and NGOs, which is essentially a just transition is only possible in a post-capitalist environment. So I think for me, where this conversation intersects with that is I would see ESGAP as very much reinforcing the third position. That green industrialization needs to be understood not just in terms of how we manufacture panels locally for etc. for our energy transition, but green industrialization must incorporate restoration of the ecosystem services that the economy depends on. And I don't think that penny has dropped. I mean, that's where the SANBI work with the AFD that you cited earlier, Haley, is so path-breaking and significant, because it actually demonstrates the linkage between the need to restore, not just prevent further deterioration. I mean, you don't get healthier by smoking light cigarettes. You still die of cancer. So we're not going to become sustainable by doing less damage. We actually have to restore. And so what's the green industrial potential of restoration of soils, for example, of our freshwater systems, which goes back to the investment question. And without that, I really don't see justice. I mean, if our economy continues to bump along the bottom, reinforced by the increasing deterioration of our ecosystem services and the impact of carbon taxes and so on, no matter how progressive your socioeconomic interventions are, you're just not going to create the livelihoods for millions of people that needs to happen. So we need an economic takeoff. So green industrialization is key, but it can't just be socio-technical. And I think that's what the ESGAP report is basically saying to us.
Hi, Ailey, you need to unmute yourself. Marie's hand has been up for quite a long time, but leave it to you to steer the discussion. Okay.
Yes, thanks, Dion. I was going to say, I was saying on mute. Let's come back to Marie, because she's had her hand up for quite some time, and maybe to reflect on that as well. And then I would like to also come back to Paul and Archives for your reflections on this conversation. And then there's two nice questions in the chat, which we can come to as well.
Yes, so briefly to have the time also of Q&A with the audience, but listening to Mark, I think this is the whole question of how do you account for positive or negative externalities, right? Because Mark was asking the question, well, how do we get private capital to finance green infrastructure? And of course, part of green infrastructure is profitable and is financed by the private sector. I mean, South Africa was able to develop quite quickly renewable energy space because that was profitable for private sector. So part of it is doable. And then the question is how we account for these externalities. And so, of course, the response must be in some form of public incentives or disincentives to move the capital in the right direction. And I think so that there's this debate about carbon credits or biodiversity credits. And I know there is a debate because for some it's, a permit to pollute or to emit. But then it's also a way to move capital in the right direction and to make some investments that may not be profitable or not profitable enough, somehow more profitable. So I think that's, that discussion about what kind of public incentives or disincentives do we need to put in place to take into account this ecosystemic services and externalities. The banking regulation is hugely important, and we see that progressing, as Mark mentioned, in Europe, in US, and in various countries, to make sure that private actors, and especially financial institutions, do not look only at the short-term risk, but also at the longer-term risk, especially, physical risk, but also, as you mentioned, transition risk, which may affect also from a very financial point of view, it may affect the quality of their portfolio in the long run. So it's very good and encouraging that the banking regulation is moving in that direction.
Thank you. Let's come to Archives, who has his hand up, and then to Paul as well, for your reflections on this interesting conversation.
Thanks. Perhaps I'll start just clarifying the issue of CO2 emissions. So the issue with CO2 is, when it comes to all other indicators, we usually think about the state of the environment. But funny, when we talk about CO2, we never look at, what are our emission levels, but more like how much we've reduced emissions over time. So both issues are captured in ESGAP, but the point is it's using per capita because this is developed to be used for any country in the world, and the only way you can compare country emissions are on a per capita level. It's the notion that just the message, I think it's relatively simple, like our current emission levels, but this applies to South Africa and to virtually every country in the world, are unsustainable. And that's the reason we are moving to net zero. So it's true that the other part, the one we usually think of when it comes to CO2, it's the progress. And in the case of South Africa, you capture that in the other indicator, that basically emissions are decreasing and it's moving in the right direction. But I come back to because it's a very good point, the list of ideal indicators. Obviously, we couldn't capture everything we could. Sometimes it's because of data. In the European case study, we had a few more indicators on other issues, less on biodiversity, for example. That list can be provided, but the issue is if ESGAP, what we're doing here is show the potential of the framework, but to be used like it needs to be owned by those that want to use it. Like you know, we are researchers and we've come a long way since 15 years where we basically would publish papers and then they just go to journals and nothing happens about that. Now, kind of lucky enough, we have these type of conversations between policymakers, researchers, but we need to go a step forward. If this concept resonates with you and you think it's useful, like we need to establish a formal process for this to be implementable in South Africa. You mentioned this kind of science policy engagement. I think that's key because otherwise this will stop here. And we have a process ongoing in Europe for this to be potentially used. So there's no decision taken, but the way it has worked is I've had tons of conversations with indicator developers in the European Environment Agency. I spent 3 days a couple of weeks ago there with them, with those that really know the data in trying to design redesign the index. And we changed some indicators, we added some, we dropped a few. So the real expertise on these indicators sits in the FFE, it sits in the Department of Water and Sanitation, it sits in South Africa. So for this kind of, we saw how it could be used. This is a communication tool. And if you think this is useful, like by all means, send us an email. We can brainstorm about like what type of process we can set up so that in the end, this ends up being your product because you have the policy knowledge, you have the indicator expertise, and it's the one that can be adapted specifically to your needs. But yeah, we can provide kind of this type of expertise, but then in the end, it's about you taking over. You know, we can talk about, we can make sure that it's consistent with the framework, but in the end, it's about potential users taking over of this indicator.
Thanks, okay, it's Paul.
Yeah.
Oh dear, we seem to have.
Yeah, he's frozen. Paul, can you hear us?
Oh dear, now he's gone. Dion, you can shout at me afterwards. We're nearly out of time and we haven't got to the questions in the chat. And you know, you need to conclude as well. So how do you advise we use our last 3 minutes?
No, maybe just attend to some of the questions if Paul couldn't speak. Paul, just jump in if you're ready. But
I'll come back again. I keep getting thrown out, and then I'm renamed wrongly. But this is all part of the fun of virtual meetings. I wanted to make 3 brief points. The first is the subject of externality and the fact that they don't give a private return. And I'm absolutely agree with what Marie-Hélène said on that, that there have to be public ways of redirecting the capital into those areas where we need it to be done. We must be clear that these externalities are real costs and they affect the real economy. So 2 examples from the UK from just recently related to the lack of natural capital. We're dead keen, as with most countries, to have lots of data centers because AI is perceived to be a very important economic development. There was a data center proposed by one of the big tech companies in East Anglia, and it was simply turned down because there was no water. So there was a direct constraint and a cost on the UK economy because of the lack of natural capital. And that situation will remain until we manage to sort out the availability of that natural capital. And it may be that data centers simply cannot go there. And that obviously is a cost, and that is a result of a loss of natural capital. And as everybody knows, the UK is not particularly a dry country. So the other one, obviously, is climate change. Climate change is inflicting hundreds of billions of dollars of cost on the global economy, and we're experiencing that, as are lots of other countries. And we will get more climate change, we will get more warming until we get to net zero. Net zero is the scientific condition for stopping warming. We can discuss when we might get to net zero, and there are certain countries that need to get there faster than others because of their higher contribution to climate change. But until we get to global net zero, we will experience more warming, and we will get more economic costs as a result of that. And that leads me really to what Dr. Changela was talking about with the kind of socioeconomic side of things. The one thing that the weak sustainability approach has taught us is that if we try to, quote, balance, and by that I mean trade off, environmental things with socioeconomic things, the environment always loses, because we are people and we put more weight on current generations and on the things that are immediately happening. And the whole strong point of the strong sustainability framework is to say that within those functions, we're at the end of trade-offs. We don't trade off, because these functions define the safe operating space within which humans have got to learn to live. This is a really difficult lesson for us. We don't like the idea of limits. We hate it. In economics particularly, we hate the idea of limits because we are aspirational creatures. But the planet is not aspirational. The planet works according to the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology. And if we transgress those laws in certain ways, then we will find it increasingly difficult to have good lives on the planet. And many, many millions of people are already experiencing that. They're already experiencing the result of these trade-offs, which we want to continue making. So the whole purpose of the ESGAP framework is to say, no, this is beyond trade-off. This is the minimum level of environmental function, which we as good life societies need to produce. And that means we will not be able to do certain things in the socioeconomic space, which we would like to do, or we will have to develop technologies which can do them with a tiny fraction of the environmental impact. And I believe that's what we're going to have to do with data centers eventually. And I think that's the big break between the ESGAP approach and the weak sustainability approach. It goes beyond the idea of balance. Within the safe operating space, by all means, we realize there will be socioeconomic priorities. But the really important insight from the Sustainable Development Goals is that within that space, we must not leave anyone behind. And Mark had lots of really interesting things to say about the just transition and all that. But to me, the safe operating space defines the environmental space within which all people need to have a chance to develop their potential and to live a decent life. And that's a real challenge. And obviously the geopolitical circumstances at the moment are not helping with that, because we're moving away from the kind of globally cooperative mindset to the other one. So yeah, I mean, thanks very much. It's been a fascinating discussion. And I've been really encouraged by the reaction from our two government representatives, more or less. I'm not sure whether SAIIA is a government organization or not, but it's certainly a very influential one. And it's been great hearing from them and hearing that actually potentially this framework might be useful. And as Arkide said, if it's not useful, then it's not worth anything. I'm beyond the idea of pure intellectual games, despite being an academic. This needs to be useful, and I very much hope it will be. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Ekins. Thank you, everybody. I do think we need to just try and get to one or two of the questions, if you'll indulge me for 1 or 2 minutes more, going over the time. I think we had a question from the attendee. Who are the key actors and stakeholders to involve to integrate a strong sustainability approach in South Africa? are there maybe some champions that we can look at, corporations, academic CSOs, to bring on board? I don't know. I saw it. Somebody said, I think Dr. Tsangela, you pointed to that, important question. Somebody want to try and answer this one?
Well, my sense generally, if I may start, is that this is an all-stakeholder business. This is something that every citizen needs to be aware of, and we're a long way from that. But obviously, there are the stakeholders with the most immediate grasp of the relevant levers. Mark has talked about the finance sector, which is obviously key, is really important. But government at all levels is also really important, because many of the investments that need to be made will not generate an immediate private return, and will therefore need to come from the public sector. And then obviously business and industry.
Oops, I think we've lost Prof. Ekins again. Let me wrap up this discussion. What I really get from this fascinating and important critical discussion we're having is that we get a clear sense that the data is very important to get a better sense for really achieving strong sustainability in South Africa. But there's a mismatch between where policies are at, and although they're very aspirational, and where the real things on the ground are happening, as well as the financial landscape in which this is embedded. My question is really, to what extent should we look at small safe-to-fail experiments that we can address these hotspots areas that the maps identify? What can be done practically in really hotspot areas that the indicators showed us? And should we also not only look at the current state, but what we can do in an anticipatory way to be proactive about possible things we need to start investing in now, so that other indicators might not also start collapsing, and really invest the time and effort, but also the finances to be proactive on all fronts. I don't know who wanted to respond to that thing.
I think for me, as Mahlodi indicated, I hope he's still here, SANBI, because the idea is to demonstrate the strong sustainability, SANBI is a good policy experiment venue. But then, as Mark also indicated, to start bringing the economic people. I mean, 15 years ago, we were struggling to bring the economic cluster departments into these conversations. But now that they are on board, it's also then about, I mean, if you see the Reserve Bank governors talking about climate risks and all that and what they are doing about it, it's very encouraging. So there's a pathway for, at least, I mean, SANBI being also a GCF related and working with other DFIs, I think there's an opportunity to work more with them, and then bringing economic partners with their peers so that they can continue to demonstrate what is possible, and Prof. Paul, and not talk about the balance and trade-offs, but facilitate restoration. But because the reality is, if you go to many of these communities in real world, people have lost jobs. For you to come and say, we need to restore, but people have lost livelihood in real time. Of course, over a long time, we want to restore and recover. It's a very difficult situation to be in. But I think SANBI, being the custodian of the department and being on the ground in terms of both the science and the ecological infrastructure, it's a useful opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think I'll have to unfortunately cut the important discussion short. We've ran out of time. I just want to thank you, not only Haley for being the moderating of this fascinating discussion, but also sincere thanks to all the panelists, the rich discussion, AFD, Maria Lynn, and as well as the speakers, Prof. Ekins, as well as our case. And I'd like to just say thank you so much to this larger message that we are getting from the ESGAP framework that really illuminates a kind of new way of thinking about how real change can happen in terms of environmental sustainability, but also, you know, in all levels of social, ecological, and social technical perspective of what are the angles that needs to be provided to give us a more scientific, but also a robust kind of compass in taking the directions forward to really advance the type of pathways required to create real climate action and environmental action and justice. So with that having been said, I would like to just thank all the participants and attendees. We will be making available the slides on our website, and the final reports will be making our way as soon as we get those published to all of the attendees, and the recording will also be on our website. So with that being said, this webinar launch comes to a close. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dion. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.